Okay, now we're going to start the assembly process. You see I've got the fan where it needs to be. Try to insert the new shroud. There's supposedly a screw right there that needs to be removed for that fan shroud to go into. There's the orifice that the extruder goes into. So hopefully this won't take too long. Probably will. I'll just put put the camera in this kind of view to make sure it's going to work. Okay. I really can't see what I'm doing here, but it looks like this is into a captured nut. This screw here is a bolt. I'll tear this thing up trying to do this. Because I could just use the old fan shroud, but I presume this is an improved design, so I'm reluctant to do that. I really don't like taking this thing apart, though. You know, this is one of the bolts that attaches the, attaches the upper part of the extruder to the lower part. I don't know, that thing may come out of there. And it looks like a lock nut, so hopefully that'll remain captured, because the stepper motor, the stepper motor, the stepper motor is actually not stopping it. I suggest if you're going to do this, put a screwdriver in there on top of that to hold that thing in place, or something fatter. A big screwdriver will do the trick. That was getting in my way. But yeah, I suggest holding, because there is a little nut well in there to capture the thing, to capture the lock nut. But you don't want that coming out. You'd have a hard time getting that back in after you remove this screw. In fact, I don't know, this is going to be hard to do. Really have a lot of reservations about doing this. Because the old one didn't actually screw in there at all. It just, friction, between this little thing here and the heat sink on that extruder is what actually held it in place. Oh, come on. Oh yeah, I need to lay something down here. Some bubble wrap would be nice. I don't have any good bubble wrap. But let me put this shroud on before I mess with that. Let's see. Okay. So here, it's a little deal. Little shroud. I'm going to put the bolt in there. Hell. Come on, damn it. I really kind of wonder how they did this thing. I mean, I don't know if this bolt will actually be long enough to actually, that bolt was not sticking through that very far. I mean, I really kind of doubt this will work. I'm sure as hell didn't send me an alternate. Let me, drop that extruder head. It's kind of crooked on me. Oh yeah, that's barely making any kind of contact. I don't think this is going to work. Yeah, I really don't think this is going to work at all. Here, let me find a screwdriver. Since this had slipped on me, even if I was getting it right, I wouldn't know. It's fairly tight, but the thing is, they made that shroud so thick that bolt is not going to go up through it nearly as far as it originally had. I hope I'm not throwing this out of whack by trying to apply all the stress to this. But see if you can. When I'm done there, I don't know if that's exactly where it should be or not, and I assume that it is. And now that that's done, what I'm going to do is go ahead and put the extruder back in, if I can. Well, it's going to be way trickier. Okay, I don't know if that's really fully seated or not. The only way I can find out is try these screws. You're supposed to do these screws a little bit at a time. So start on one, do 6 or 8 turns, and then I go to the other side. And try to do it about, an eighth, no more than a quarter inch at a time. And just switch between sides. That's what I talked about on their video for their kit that they had out there back in early 2013. And this extruder design is kind of similar. And again, just go back and forth, do about 1/8 of an inch, in each screw, and go to the other one and do 1/8 of an inch. Because otherwise it may rack the thing. They rack the extruder head, the hot end. Oh, that screws start to get hard to turn after a little while. Because while you're turning them, you're also threading into the extruder. That's the thing. Probably be better to have a screw gun for this, but you might end up stripping the screws. Just try to be gentle as much as you can when you're grabbing this thing. Try not to grab anything too tightly or anything. That's hard to do, especially as these screws start getting harder to turn. Well, but it is getting more solid, I'll tell you that much. Yeah, boy, I'll tell you, the screw closest to the stepper motor is the hardest. Man, this is hard to do without applying quite a bit of force against this. Because the bolts actually start threading through the top of that hot end. So you're basically trying to self-tap it with non-self-tapping bolts here. Boy, this is really tough getting in here like this. Yeah, I think I'm going to end up stripping this one bolt. I don't think there's any way I'm going to get that in there. Stripping the head on it. I'm having to apply a lot of force to this. Yeah, I can't. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get these in all the way. So the rear one is not so bad, but boy, this front one is really tight. You know, the situation is, you can see, that screw right there is giving me a real hard time. That one's going in relatively easy, but boy, this one, that is really giving me a hard time. Boy, I'm having to put a lot of force on this. I'm trying not to touch, to grab it with this hand here. I'm trying not to grab it on the gears or anything. I'm trying to, because I don't want to apply too much force to the moving parts while I'm trying to do this. Jeez. I mean, man. This is really tough because, like I said, it's trying to cut through the aluminum on that heater block, or on the heat sink part of the hot end there. Man, this is killing my back trying to do this. Boy, yeah, I don't know, this is not at all easy. Whew. Yeah, I don't know, this other screw, it may be impossible to get in here. And if I ever had to do this more than once, this would strip out. My advice, if you get them to send you one of these kits, make sure they send you new bolts. Because you probably will end up stripping these things out. They should almost use hex bolts or something. Okay, I just about got it. Jeez. Now to do the other one a little more. Whew. Oh, the rear one's seated. Now just a little more to do in this front one. Yeah, if you'd had a screw gun, you probably would have stripped this head by now. Okay, that's about as far as I can get that. I should have the extruder mounted. It feels pretty solid. Now, these cables, this is for the thermocouple or the thermistor, and this is for the heater. I believe we're coming up under here, I think, over the fan. And I think they were. Plug the thermocouple in. Okay, and then for the heater block. Okay. Alright, that should have the extruder and thermocouple hooked in. Next, we're going to do the fan. So, picking up where we left off, start the fan thing. See, I haven't touched anything yet. It's all still the same. Our extruder is installed and plugged in. And again, I made sure that I did the extruder first, so you know that for whatever reason I didn't get lost, you know, in plugging things in. It's just good general practice to do you know, before I tore into the fan. But let me go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and mount the fan, and we'll fan, you know, I'm going to mount those two fan screws. It'd be better to have 4 in this case, but again, I assume, you know, based on how this fan was mounted, you know, it was mounted kind of like this, you know, with the free end. You know, I can actually spin the hub of the fan with my thumb, so it shouldn't be the sticker side. The sticker side should be pointed in. Again, I wish they had flow arrows on these fans, but they don't, as far as I can see. So, you know, the funny thing is this little fan, the cheap one that they hate, actually does have flow arrows on it. You know, you can actually see them right there. I mean, I don't think you can see them on the camera, but this new one of theirs does not have flow arrows on it. So I just got to assume that that's the right direction to mount it, but at least that tells me that indeed it is a different model of fan. You know, it's not the same, you know, cheap fan that they gave me with this originally, so that's good at least. Let's see. Now, let's see. I guess I should make the cord on this left-hand side, since that's where it's got to exit. What I'll do is I guess put one screw in each corner of the fan, because again the old fan was actually only had 2 screws in it because it was actually resting up against the back of this thing, so they just had 2 lower screws because it was mounted more or less vertically, so it just had 2 screws on the lower side, but there's no screws on the upper side. But this fan, on the other hand, given how it's mounted, you actually got to have, you know, it actually should have 4 screws, not just 2. But 2 will probably be sufficient. Although, I don't know, this thing wiggles around quite a bit when it's printing. Let me get these screws started. They're pretty tight in this wells. Okay. They're not going to penetrate much either. But I don't have any particular preference in which corners I'm using. These are just arbitrary, so... Okay, now I'm trying to get this in here. It's going to be a little tricky. I wish I could have mounted this first, but if I, you know, before I mounted the shroud, but because I had to put that screw, that bolt in the back of it, there's no way I can do that. I mean, this is... Here, let me just go ahead and try to totally strip this out here. I want these to freely spin so that I can spin them, because I'm sure these, you know, that's a 3D printed shroud, so I'm sure it's not got threaded holes in it, so I need to be able to spin these anyway so I can get them seated. So I'm just making sure I dig this out. Okay, I need to... Here, let me get this flashlight here. So I can see what I'm doing. More or less. Still can't see what I'm doing, really. Might as well be doing it in the dark. Come on. Seems to have gone in. I guess that's going in the hole, I really can't tell. Give the fan a spin, it's not, make sure it's not obstructed. Anyway, that's fine. Okay, now like I said, I've already got this cable, and what I'm going to do I'm going to, let's see, yeah, I'm going to leave a little slack in this because we can, you know, when we put the wire tie in, we can hold it back in. But basically, I'm going to go ahead, because like I said, you know, they actually give you a whole cable with both ends on it. You know, like I said, you could restring it back through the split loom tubing if you didn't want to solder it. Just want to emphasize that, but again, I'm more comfortable doing it this way, it's just as fast for me, actually a little less of a headache. Because, you know, if you tried to, the thing is that if you wanted to do it that way, what you're going to have to do, let me cut this fan off. I'm going to cut its wire off just like an inch from the fan body of the old fan. Okay. But anyway, what you'd have to do, you know, is you'd have to actually tape this x-axis down, or use some wire ties or something to tape it down, you know, at both ends, because if you turn this thing upside down, this thing will fall off. And two, this plate might come loose. I don't, you know, these magnets seem pretty strong, but it might come loose, so you might actually have to tape it down too, you know, because otherwise you got a broken plate. So, you know, that's why it would be a bit of a hassle doing it that way. And it might throw everything out of alignment, you know, if these screws get bent or something like that, well, then you get a screwed up machine, you know. That's why I'd rather do it this way, you know. But again, if you took proper precautions, you know, set this thing upside down, you know, with on some, you know, like 2 tables side by side, you know, to where there's a space underneath, and, you know, and you're sure this thing wasn't going to crash on the floor, in theory, you know, you could do it the other way. But this, to me, is just a safer way of doing it, because, again, this thing worked perfectly. You know, that's one of the reasons, you know, I'm trying to be as careful as I can with this, because I don't want to destroy the precision that was out of the box, because this thing worked perfectly out of the box. Now, I did notice, incidentally, a little while ago, that this wire here had come off this limit switch. Let me put this fine so you can see. This wire here had come off this limit switch, so it's kind of a design defect. Here, they'd actually soldered them in place. But here, yeah, this little quick connect, you know, had come loose, so it's not on there very well. I mean, I tried squeezing it with some pliers, but really I needed to hit it with one of those crimping tools or something to get it on there better, or just solder it. But anyway, I assume, though, that's part of the mechanism they use to automatically bed level. So it would kind of suck if that actually came loose. So, you know, the rule of thumb is keep your eye on that thing. Because that's actually something they ought to correct. They ought to go ahead and solder those in, like they did this one here. But right now I'm going to leave it as it is, and we'll, you know, I'll fix that if that's a problem later. I'll move the camera. What I'm going to do, see if it's necessary for me to have this on. Okay. Do I still have that set to? Yeah, I do. Okay. You know, this camera is a little Toshiba camera I bought at Amazon, and, you know, it's a little cheesy, but it works. I mean, you know, I only paid like $70 for it. Maybe it's 45. I think it's $45 for it. And you know, it was in their used, you know, out of their Amazon outlet or whatever, and worked really well. You know, I mean, again, it's not a fancy, super great camera, but I mean, again, for a little high-def, you know, capable camera, it's really compact, fits in your shirt pocket. I mean, it's actually a nice little camera. What I'm doing right now is you know, this is zip cord, so I'm actually taking my wire clippers here, and I'm actually trying to separate the zip cord into 2 wires. You know, it's difficult for me to show you this because A, I don't have 3 hands, and B, it's pretty fine detail. This is really tiny wire. Oh, damn it. It's hard to get it right, too. Oh, jeez, I probably should have left more length on it because of that. Run out of wire length. I'm not cutting everything. I ended up having to do it the other way after all. It's really difficult to separate this small zip cord like this. I think I got it. It's pretty difficult to strip it too without accidentally cutting through it. Okay, I'm going to cut about half an inch off, if I can. If you're an amateur at this, you might want to use the other type of wire strippers, the kind that have the multiple settings. But you know, if you strip wire as many years as I have, these are the best to use. But they do take some skill, especially on thin wire like this. It's difficult. They do take a little skill to use, you know, but it's an acquired skill. Okay, I got the two wires stripped. I guess I got to try to readjust the camera. Again, I wish I could get a better view for you here. Let's see what I got here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stretch the wire out a little bit. Okay, it's fully released now. Sheesh, I wish I would have done that with the other one. Okay, let me get my little bag. You know, they sent me this bag with some wire ties and heat shrink tubing in it. Now, normally I splice wires together a little differently than I'm going to do it here. This is actually the quote-unquote proper way of doing it, but I usually do it a little differently because it's easier and faster and actually makes a better overall connection. But you know, but you do have to use bigger heat shrink tubing than they gave me, and I don't want to go over to my shop and get any. I don't think I have any over here. Oh, where did it go? It's difficult to thread on here. Okay, I got my heat shrink tubing on here, which you probably can't see what I'm doing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take these wires black to black, red to red, and I'm going to hook them. Again, this isn't how I normally do it. This is the proper way to do it, but it is really hard to keep these things together doing it this way, because they don't have a very good mechanical connection until after you've soldered it. But it's a double hook is what I'm doing. In fact, let me see if I can see that. Flower mode. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. See if you can see the double hook right there. So that's a hook on top, and then I got a hook on bottom. And like I said, this is not normally the way I do it. How I'd normally do it is I'd use slightly larger heat shrink tubing and just simply twist the wires together and then solder them, and then, you know, well, twist them and then bend them over and solder them. But it does make a big bump, you know, when you do that, so it means you got to use slightly larger heat shrink tubing. But the thing is that it forms a better electrical connection by doing that, because you have more intimate contact with the copper wire. So, because there's an ohmic penalty when connecting wires like this. But I don't want to bore you with technical details, but it's really kind of a better way to doing it electrically the way I do it than this. But this is pretty standard. Let me lay something on my printer bed here, a piece of paper, so that I don't get anything on my bed. And I'm nearly out of this, but I'm going to take some of my liquid flux, which you can hardly see in there, and use that here in a second. But first I'm going to go ahead and get my other wire done. I'll do it from this angle this time. But see, that's the thing, you know, this is such a delicate connection. I better go ahead and just solder it. I'm going to take some of my flux right here and just pour a little drop on it, which you probably couldn't see. take my cheapy soldering iron that I bought at Radio Shack in Colorado Springs 15 years ago, which is the only iron I keep in my office. Let me make sure I got any solder. I don't usually, I don't normally use this iron, but again, I just didn't want to have to drag my soldering station from the shop. It's kind of a hassle. We're just doing one thing like this. Yeah, this thing is pretty bad shape, but hopefully it'll work. That sizzling is the flux, and it's working. But I got kind of a, it's kind of hard. That's why I don't like doing joints this way, because it's just hard to keep them uniform. So you end up with a solder ball on it, knock some of it off. Cause especially with these small wires, it tends to fray when you're doing that. See, it's really hard to, almost got to go snip them all off. If you're not careful, you can end up breaking it. That's why the way I do it is considerably better. It's a safer way of doing it, but again, I thought I'd try doing it the standard way since I'm making a video. Try to clip some of this excess off here, because it's, like I said, this is really awkward having to work like this. Normally I would do this under a mag lamp because I really can't see worth the crap. Okay. But yeah, my other waveforms are much stronger solder joint mechanically. Now, let me get a cigarette lighter. Really the best way to heat shrink tubing. Let me pull this other one out of the way. And Bob's your uncle. Okay. Alright. Now you're probably wondering, why do I use liquid flux when the solder I use does have flux in it. In fact, it's a no-clean flux solder, but the liquid flux I use is also no-clean. But it's because there's no comparison between soldering with a, solder-based flux and soldering with this liquid flux. I mean, it's the only way to get really good joints because it really wicks it up properly. In fact, I'll often actually soak my wires in it. When I'm able to, I'll actually usually soak my wires in it. Dagnammit. I'm trying to get this pressed down as much as I can, because again, this makes a really lousy mechanical connection until you actually solder it, and even then it's not so great. Okay, let me again try to apply another little bob of flux here. Man, I wish I had my other little flux dispenser. It has a needle tip on it. It's a little less messy. And again, this is just a part of a kit I keep in my office in case I need to do something. Last time's got kind of a glob on it, but I'll see if that HST will slip over it. Yeah, there it goes. Alright. Now, I did have the red wire going to the red wire and the black wire going to the black wire, so I didn't get that messed up. But again, if you're an amateur at soldering, it doesn't really take a lot of skill to solder two wires together if you have the right stuff. Again, that liquid flux, which you can buy that through Jamico or someplace, and just make sure it's no clean, and try to make sure your solder's no clean. You don't have to worry about it causing as much corrosion down the road. Okay, but now we're done with that. Now I got to do the wire tie thing. We got to tie this wire harness back. And you know, there is actually, let me see if there's any chance of you seeing what's going on here. See right there, you can see the tooth of those gears. Well, that's actually where the wire tie goes. You know, you see the top of that body right there. You know, this is part of this plastic injection molded part. The wire tie goes in there and, you know, up around this thing. Now, I could use the wire ties they sent me, but let's see, this one might work. And it might work. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick this through here until it hits that gear. And it's nice to have a flashlight when you're doing this, but I'm going to put it through here until the tip of the wire tie hits that gear and I can see it coming through. Okay, and what you can do is you can just take a screwdriver as that comes through and make sure it doesn't try to go through any of the holes in the gear, and then, you know, then it's over and through. So that was pretty easy. Now make sure you get your wires where you want them, like I almost didn't do. And I'm going to put a little loop in this fan wire since I left a little excess length on it. I'm going to tie it in a bit of a loop. Now let me put it on. Damn it. On this side. So these are one of the wires that, one of the wire ties that I have, I think. Let's see what I did with that bag. With the, I don't know where that bag went. Oh, it's on the floor. No, it might be one of the ones they gave me. Anyway, point is, that's got the wire harness pretty well secured again. Said everything's connected. And it should be ready to go. That's why you put a piece of paper down, by the way. Piece of solder on it. You can see that. Anyway, even though that's not a problem really, I don't think, to get it on the bed. It's still good practice. Now let me go ahead and clip my wire tie. And unplug my soldering iron. You don't want to accidentally leave that on when you're done with it. Again, you know, if you have the right flux, you know, just, you know, they sell several different, you know, Kester and places like that. Oh man, I unplugged the printer. Sorry. But anyway, they sell different types of flux. You know, Kester makes some, and you know, MCM, you know, used to be a good place to go through for things like that. But, you know, again, if you have a little container of liquid flux, you know, that's great. The flux I actually use here is this flux I use for my mass soldering process. It's actually, you know, flux that you can use for a wave soldering machine, etc. But anyway, if you use the right flux, you know, and even a cheap, you know, $3 soldering iron like that, yeah, you know, it's not too difficult. You just got to flow the solder. You know, like I said, bend your wires, you know, where they're mechanically sound. Put some few drops of flux on them. And, you know, then apply solder to the iron tip. And when you see it start to flow, make it flow, make the bead flow onto the wire. And it'll kind of take care of itself. That's why it's actually pretty easy to do if you're, you know, using the right methods. If you're not, if you weren't using that flux, boy, can you form some bad solder joints, particularly if you're an amateur at it. But that's the methods, you know, we've used for a very, very long time now. Anyway, oh, here's where that went. Anyway, I'll turn this off now, and, well, actually I do have something else to do. I got to put the shroud back on, so I guess you can watch me do that. I do have an extra wire tie here, and like I said, this cable assembly here needs to go. Probably destroy everything trying to do this. Still in there, see they have that little block there. That's where the wire tie held that cable, and then wire tie through that. And basically, you can see too how awkward this is. Let's see. See those little round projections in the plastic housing there? Those are where those rods go. That helps keep the rods secure. So, and I left the spool holder on it so you know which way's back and front. If there's a difference, I don't know. Okay. It is a good idea to have this shroud on here because it does help stabilize those rods. If you don't have that, this thing vibrates a lot and will throw your print off. These aren't aligned right now. Let's see, make sure this is what it's supposed to be. I don't know where that is supposed to be. It's probably supposed to be on this other side. It's supposed to be over here. I wasn't paying attention when I took it apart. Okay. Make sure that's right. Should have gone ahead and harnessed it before I put the screws in. That's what I'm going to do now. So I'm not really sure where it's supposed to go, but my advice is, move the head as far to the left as possible before you try to wire tie this thing down. It's hard to get up into it. It looks like this thing is getting away with filament. I don't know what the water, if there are any guidelines to how this should be mounted there. So let me think about that for a minute.